All right, 2 minutes. We're live. Or on countdown. Yes, some of us more than others. Percussion doesn't count. Are you sharing it, April? We're at 30 seconds.
Hola, and welcome to Power and Perspective, where we reframe conversations with empathy and humor. Today, a lot of humor, and I have no empathy, zero empathy today. Well, okay, that's a lie. Empathy for the adults. But today, we're talking with John Malvin about how education has changed through time. Hello, welcome, John.
Hi. Glad to
Thank
be.
you for joining us. Yes. So usually Aaron and I share our perspectives, but I think it's too long. Like that's we have the perspective of I graduated in 1995, and also I'm a teacher for I've been in education for 19 years, over 20 years. So Aaron, what's your perspective?
Yeah, I was
on
in
this?
education for 12
We're-
years, and that was a long time ago. Uh,
Actually 13 years, kindergarten through 12th grade.
13 years. Yeah.
That's
I
13 years.
count
And math.
kindergarten.
I was gonna say
Yeah.
math did well
It,
for you.
it was very important. Yeah, I don't remember. I have no idea. I only know what it was like. I have no idea what it's like now, or I don't know. Other than not being beat, that's the only thing I'm aware of. Which is apparently very important to April. That
Yeah, corporal punishment.
yeah,
Bring it back. Bring it back. I'm kidding, people. I'm kidding.
she's not kidding.
So now let's go to the most important person who has all of the information that we all want to know. John, why don't you just tell us a little bit about you, how long you've been in education, and then go where you flowed.
Okay. I graduated from high school in 1966. Um, I started teaching actually in 69, but officially in 1970. And when I retired, I had more than 40 years of teaching at several different schools. I taught at really small schools and I taught at really big schools. I think the range of schools I taught at was from like 150 students to close to 3,000.
Ooh.
And
That's
I've got a lot of experience across the board in that respect.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. And what are you doing now?
What I'm doing now is mostly sitting at home, but I substitute teach for two different high schools, and I really enjoy it, even though my colleagues tell me that I'm an idiot for hanging around with those stupid kids.
Yeah. I wouldn't say an idiot, but crazy comes to mind. Crazy, crazy. but I could see how it would be, how it could be fun and something to keep you young, um, being around the youngins. Um, where do you want to start, Aaron? Just have so much.
Well, I guess like if you think back on your first year teaching, like what is like one like big thing that you remember that's so different now than it was when you first started?
Oh, that's a good one. Um, I had a student that was annoying as all get out. And back to April's punishment situation, uh, this student drove me one day. I got really angry. And I don't usually get angry with the kids, but I got really angry. And I was a band director, so risers. And the kid was sitting up on the third riser. So I went charging through the music stands, knocking music stands over, and I grabbed him by the shirt collar. And we were on the second floor, and the window was open, and the window was open right at the level he was at. And I was shaking him, and I said, I ought to throw you out the window. And he said, you can't do that. I'm going to tell my dad. And I said, you don't have to. I'm going to tell your dad for you. And so after we got finished and I sent him to the office, I went downtown, which was a block, to his dad's office. And his dad owned a Sears store. And I went in the Sears store and I what happened. And his dad looked at me and said, you should have thrown him out the window. That was the very first disciplinary thing I ever had to deal with.
Wow.
Wow. And how is it we all know how it's different, but what would your reaction be to discipline nowadays?
Well, in this state, for sure, you wouldn't grab the student and shake them or grab the student at all. And I'd probably write out what they call a referral and send them to the office, which I did that at one of the schools I sub at one time about 4 or 5 years ago. And she said, you can't do this to me. And I said, yeah, I can. So I gave her the paper she had to take to the office. And the office later told me that we didn't come to the office, but she never came back to school.
Oh my goodness. She just left the school?
Yeah, she just left the school. And in that particular school, I hardly ever have a problem with a kid. And that was probably the biggest standout that I ever had. And I never even got close to her. I just handed her the paper and said, take it to the office. And I explained on the paper what was going on.
Oh my gosh. I can't believe first of all, I can't believe that's their process, to have the bad kid take the paper that says why they were bad down to the office.
Yeah.
Right? Like, this seems like an issue waiting to happen. The dog liked to join us.
Well, there's multiple copies of the paper, and this takes the pink one, and I kept the yellow and the blue one, and it had everything written on it. So if she didn't make it to the office, all I had to do was go down and give them the paper, and they'd call her in. But apparently she didn't like what was going on. I think she was 17. So
they can't really do anything, right?
Yeah. There was, once she was out of the room, I was done with her, and that was that.
Oh my goodness. I know that teachers nowadays have a huge issue with like disciplinary action. Like we're very restricted in what can be done. And most schools are turning towards social emotional learning versus disciplinary reaction. Like, how can I teach you to acknowledge your feelings and then be with those feelings and react to those feelings in an appropriate manner, which I respect. But also, I think there's like when kids are young, there's a place for spankings, like an immediate result or a consequence. I think there could be a balance of both.
Well, I could jump back to what I was talking to Aaron about before we started. When I was a senior in high school, I got my only night's detention in all of high school, and we had to go down to a room, and the room was blackboards all the way around. and there were circles on the blackboard with a dot, and you had to put your nose on the dot, and you had to have your heels raised because the dot was high enough. You had to stand on your toes to get the dot, and if your heels hit the floor, a teacher came around and hit you with a paddle.
Whew.
Craziness. How often would you misbehave if that was the discipline? Some kids still misbehaved all the time, huh?
Some did, but for me, one time that was enough.
Yeah.
When I got home, I got it again. So,
Oh man.
Yeah, and I've heard that a lot. I've heard that a lot from generations before mine, that you got it at school, and again, you got it at home. And nowadays, do you see a difference in your later years teaching and nowadays about the home connects to discipline?
yes, I do. In the beginning, when I first started teaching, parents were really supportive of any kind of issue, and they generally took care of the problem. There were exceptions, but for the most part, parents took care of it. And then as time progressed on, parents didn't seem interested anymore. They had to go out and work 2 or 3 jobs to earn money, and they didn't pay any attention to the kids. And I had all sorts of situations. I didn't have any kids that I thought needed to be paddled, but I did have a girl that worked in my office as a secretary, and not by the school, by just a student. And she was cutting on herself, and she always wore long sleeve shirts so I wouldn't see it. And I knew that this was going on, and we had so many times where I talked to her, and that bothered me. It still bothers me, and she's in touch with me again through Facebook. So it's really good to know that she's still there, and she's married and has kids and seems to be happy.
That is good. Facebook is good for that.
Yeah, I've had a vast majority of my former students keep in touch with me on Facebook.
Yeah,
And
so
I
cool.
consider that an honor.
Yeah. So TC says that she got swatted. Swatted?
Swats.
She got swats for chewing gum in 7th grade from the teacher. And you know what's hilarious? Oh, mine was 6th grade. The only time I got in trouble besides not doing homework, the only time I got in trouble in school was for chewing gum in core class in 6th grade. And he made me go to the office. Like, I got a referral to the office for chewing gum. And everybody in class was like, they're like, you're sending April to the office? And I was like bawling because I got a referral to the office. It was horrible.
Well, there was only one time in the middle part of my career that I ever paddled a student, and the oddity was it was my son.
Yes, I could see that. I had my own kids in my class before, and I would say I was harder on them than any other student in class because they knew better.
Well, my son, I don't remember exactly what he was doing, but he was causing some kind of trouble, and I sent him to the office, and the office called me and told me that was a paddling offense, and they told me I had to come and issue the 4 swats.
Oh my gosh.
Only time I ever paddled a student.
Oh my goodness. That's
So with
funny.
the parental involvement stuff, did you see, like, was it a slow change over time, or did you see like large milestones kind of over time where there was a sudden lack of engagement from parents?
No, I taught a little over 40 years, and boy, that sounds crazy. But during that time period, probably it was just a gradual shift over time. And I think the gradual shift was when money got to the point where people had to work multiple jobs to get money, because then kids didn't have anybody at home. I had one student, actually one of my former students sent me a long thing. I asked her if she would give me any thoughts about doing this program. And she said that when she came to my school as a sophomore in high school that her mother was an alcoholic and her dad disowned her and left him. And she would be home alone with her sister all the time. And she'd come to school and she'd have no money and no food. So I usually tried to buy her breakfast and lunch, at least lunch, if nothing else, while she was there because it just wasn't right. And she was a wonderful person. And I loved her to death and still do. She's a teacher now. And she went through a horrible divorce. And then now she's happily married again, has 3 kids. And so, but she was one of those kind of people that I can think back. She was in the middle part of all that. And there were more than her that were like that. I didn't buy lunch for every one of them because I wouldn't have. But in her case, it was pretty necessary. And we'd have being a band director, we'd have a night activity, and we'd get finished like at 9 or 9:30 or 10, and she'd be sitting in front of the school with no ride home. So I started giving her a ride home. And nowadays, I think the difference is you wouldn't dare do that. As a male, I wouldn't tell a female girl by herself, I'll take you home. But I took, and she was so happy about it. And in her little paper that she sent me, she said that was one of the most meaningful things in her life was that I cared. And it wasn't that I gave her money or I got her lunch or took her home. It was that I cared. That was the big thing. And she didn't have anybody that cared about her in her life. And I think that was, as you say, a gradual thing that happened because early in the career, I think most parents that I knew cared. I mean, they would paddle them if they needed to or whatever, but they cared about them. And gradually, as it went along, it seemed like a lot of parents didn't care anymore. And
I think you're right about the job thing. As a parent who became a single parent, as a single mother working, and I can say that I was so tired when I got home because I was a teacher. I was so tired when I got home. If they did their homework, great. If they didn't, we'll deal with that another day. Like, you know what I mean? It was just, I couldn't. It's Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? They ate dinner. They did their after school activities. Like we couldn't fit it all in. And I didn't have the bandwidth, the capacity to focus on it all. So I definitely think that you have something with regards to parents starting to have to work more and more and more to get what they need.
I just spoke with a teacher before I left school today, and she told me, we were talking about this, she wouldn't write down anything for me to say, but she did say that, she had a student come in while I was in there talking to her, and apparently he'd been absent and he needed to turn in some material. And she told him, she said, don't worry about it. Turn it in. She says, I'd like you to turn it in piece by piece, but if you want to wait and turn it in all at once, I'll take that too. She says, just take your time and do your best job with it. And when he left, she looked at me and she said, his mother works 18 hours a day. And when she comes home, she's not in any shape to deal with his school stuff. And I think that's probably pretty much what's happening these days.
Totally. And when you said the thing about being able to take the girl home, that made me think of something too. There's so many restrictions nowadays where we can't do much about, that we can't. We're restricted in how much we help. So the kids at my school get free breakfast. Everyone gets free breakfast, and they make every kid take a bag because they have to say they get free breakfast. And if they start not giving out as much, we stop getting as much funding, right? So every kid has to take this bag of breakfast. that promptly goes into the trash can. I would say like 70% of the kids just throw it away and don't even look inside of it. And if anybody's watching who can get me trouble, what do I care? Fine. Sometimes, and sometimes I take apples out. Yesterday, I went and dug out all the sporks, plastic wrapped sporks with a napkin inside. I'm like, we can use these. Like, this is crazy. So much food is in the trash can. It kills me. But legally, I'm not really supposed to take any of that food, or the kids aren't really legally supposed to even take that food home. Let's say they didn't have dinner. They know they're not going to have dinner that night. They're not really supposed to take it home with them. Right? Because all these rules.
I believe most of the kids, I haven't looked into this close, but I believe schools I teach at get free breakfast and lunch now.
Yeah.
And most of the kids, when I'm walking into the school, they're sitting in the cafeteria eating. So I assume they're actually doing that. When I go in the cafeteria go by the cafeteria at lunchtime, which sometimes I do and sometimes I don't, but they're all eating and getting whatever they want. If there's multiple options, they get what they want and they sit there and eat it. I don't see a lot of kids just get something and throw it away. I see somebody standing there telling them they have to take it.
Yeah, that's the difference, I think. Yeah, and I think a lot of the kids I had 27 kids in my room. I would say every day maybe one kid eats the apple, maybe, and the oranges hardly ever get eaten. From my room alone, 27, we'll say 26 apples and oranges get thrown away. 26 boxes of milk. No one ever drinks the milk in the trash.
Wow. Well, I wouldn't have any oranges either.
When they're messy.
Yeah, I know. I wouldn't either. And they look, I mean, they don't look like appetizing oranges. Let's be real. They probably taste fine, but they just don't look like really great oranges.
And Katie had a question talking about the flip side of the lack of interaction from parents, that she sees some parents who seem overly involved. Have there always been kind of parents who were trying too hard and maybe being a hindrance?
Or helicopter parents?
I think because now parents, when I remember early my teaching career and when my sons were growing up, and they're both quite older now, but when they were growing up, if they were going to play a sport, they played a sport. And I didn't force them to do anything, and most of them, and I say most, didn't force their kids to do those things. But now the kids are not only playing soccer at school, but they're playing select soccer and some kind of statewide soccer, and not just soccer, but other sports, football. My grandson just started football, and I think he's 8 years old. And to me, that's a huge mistake. And I hope they're not listening right now. I think that's a big mistake. But we have football starting at age 6, and people want their kids to be in it, and they want them to be in everything. They want them to be in football. They want them to be in basketball. And it didn't used to be a big push. It used to be, do you want to play basketball? Go try out. Do you want to play football? Go try out.
You had more autonomy as a child, really.
Yeah. But now it's, you're going to play select soccer. You're going to play select football. A big deal for the kids. And I talked to some of them. I said, you really enjoy it? And every once in a while, someone will say, no.
Yeah.
I do it because my mom and dad want me to do it.
Yep. And also with regards to like helicopter parents or parents who are, I bet we have extreme cases now. And the parents who are overly involved with school stuff, it's usually because they want to attack the teacher. It's the teacher's fault. Look at all these things that happened to my son, or like, look at all the grades that he's getting. Like, it's your fault. What are you doing? So I noticed the overly involved parents aren't there to support their kid. They're there to blame somebody
Oh,
else.
yes, I know a teacher that I saw looking at uh, the grades on the computer, and she happened to mention to me that one student in particular had 5 or 6 zeros, and she said the problem is the student never turned in any work, but yet the parents called and complained to the teacher and said the teacher was all wrong because the student was getting a bad grade. And she says, like, if they don't turn in their work, I've got.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. That's what I always say. They're like, you gave me an F. I'm like, no, I gave you nothing. You
Yeah.
earned an F. I did nothing. I just wrote the F on the paper. That's it.
yeah,
Steven, I like Steven's thing. Because you were a band director, you may not have been involved in this kind of thing, but the fact, do you have any thoughts on the fact that they no longer teach cursive writing in school?
oh yes, I'm very much personally against that because I remember what a big deal it was when I was growing up and when my kids were growing up. I remember that was a big deal, and then all of a sudden, and I think, okay, what are we going to put on our checks, and what are
Yeah.
contracts? Just do like they did in the 1800s and write an X on the
Next.
contract.
What are checks?
Yeah. And
Yeah. The kids, if I tell the kids
Yeah.
to like sign something, they're like, what does that mean? I'm like, just write your name. I don't know what to tell you. And so now they like to write cursive on their own. So they like self-teach themselves. This one fifth grader I have, I'm like, dude, you can't write cursive anymore because you're not writing it correctly. So I can't read it. So you're basically writing like your own foreign type of writing.
Interesting.
You're like bastardizing cursive, and you think you're writing cursive, but you're not. And I can't read it because they liked to learn it. I remember like not having to do it perfectly over and over and over again. That was ridiculous, I think. But they liked to learn to write cursive.
And I remember when I was teaching and we had something the kids had to sign, the girls always had this beautiful writing. You could read it and it made everything. And the guys, like me, just wrote it in and you could hardly tell what it said.
Yeah,
Can confirm.
that was me. I was more like the guys. Yeah. You talked to a bunch of people and got some opinions before coming on the show, which we really appreciate your effort in research. Does something stand out to you that you'd like to share now that somebody wrote or sent in?
A couple of things. One is the last 2 days I subbed at 2 different high schools, and in yesterday it was anatomy and physiology, and today it was history. And I took time at the beginning of each period to ask the class, do they think their parents at their age were smarter or not as smart as they are? And except for one class out of the 2 days, and that was 12 classes, one class said, yeah, they were smarter. The rest of the classes said, no, they weren't smarter. But then one guy this afternoon and qualified that, he said, I don't think they were, I think it's different. He said, because we have to know so many other things that they didn't have to know when they were in school. And I thought that was a very, very good statement because it made so much sense. The kids today are smarter than I was in the sense that they have to know so many things that weren't there when I was in school. And
Yeah,
even when you were in school.
totally.
Yeah, and
That's a great observation on his part. Like,
that's what I thought.
he's a thinker.
Yeah, and some of the one kid said, "Well, my dad would think he was smarter no matter what."
That is also true, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, and they I wonder, and the standards, even the standards are different today, right? Everybody talks about how they're moving it up and up and up. Like you should be reading before you enter kindergarten, really. They say when it used to be kindergarten was like play. Yeah, that's what they say now. You should know the basics of reading before entering kindergarten. And now I think back, like I don't know how long ago. I'm talking out my butt, but it used to be where like you started learning your ABCs in kindergarten, right? Like that's where you learned your ABCs, and then maybe first grade you started reading.
Yeah. And
Everything just gets pushed.
yes, so many situations that are so different over the years with that kind of stuff that um, the kid, well, another one is that when I was in school, 85 to 100 was an A. And now 90 to 100 in a lot of cases. It's not all cases, but 90
Really?
is an A. Yeah, and 60 is passing. And you had a 60, you were done for. And but now they not only get an A, they can get an A plus. And I'm still not sure in my mind what an A plus is. I mean,
Cool.
you did the best on all the work, but an A plus means you did better than the best. And I see.
That's so funny. I did not know that 95 used to be an A.
Yes, and in some cases 96 was an A.
Wow, that's
So
hardcore.
when I was in English class, 96 to 100 was an A. Some of the other classes it was 95, but it was not 94 or 93. 94 was a B.
Wow. So out here too, they just passed, I think for the whole county, we have what's called the minimum F. So you cannot get below a 55% on an assignment. So even if you don't turn it in, you get a 55% because zeros skew the grade. They can never catch up.
That's interesting.
I've heard some teachers talking about something like that, and I honestly don't know if that's going on here or not, but I've heard some teachers talking in that direction. So maybe it is, but I know that a lot of the teachers work hard to try not to fail a student. I don't know if it's because they don't want them back next year or they
That is
just.
a good point.
But my good friend that's a teacher, she tries not to fail the students, but she will if she has to. But she tries not to because she wants them to learn.
Yeah, that's the whole goal.
What's going on.
See, that's my argument against the minimum F is if you score 20% on an assignment, that communicates to me that you know 20% of the content, right?
Right.
And that's not just bad on you, that's bad on me. I haven't taught you. I haven't taught you in a way that has engaged you for you to learn. Education tool. I think we just put too much weight on this grade, like it's your value. No, it's just a communication tool. You know 20% of the content. Maybe we're only paying attention 20% of the time, which is probably the case.
Right. And I've been in classes where I've seen that. I've seen kids, I used to say something, but I don't often say it anymore. But when the kids are studying or doing an assignment, and two or three of them have their heads down, sound asleep, and as long as they're not snoring, I don't always say something. And I've seen other teachers not say something from time to time. Now, some teachers will just subtly go mention something, do you have that done, or have you started, or whatever. But
yeah, I have a kid who falls asleep in class. But also I went to try to find out about it. Turns out he wakes up super early to get his little brother and little sister ready for school and has to walk them to school, and stays up late and takes care of them at night. And so he falls asleep. And if I can let him sleep, if we're not talking about anything that I know is going to be on the test, I let him sleep. But Yeah, he's also one of the ones that makes sure that he gets the food every morning. Even if he comes late, he makes sure to stop by, get the food, and he eats it in my class instead of his class
Yeah,
before that. Yeah.
Well,
no, yeah, and it's
go
it's
ahead.
like we've talked about where it's treated like a race, which is silly because if you watched a race and everybody started at the same point and their expectation was for everybody to finish at the same time, it'd be nonsense that nobody would be accommodated for. It'd be basically punishment for the best and the worst, right?
Yeah.
In favor of the middle ground. So it just doesn't make any sense. Everybody's on a different path. Everybody's going to learn differently in different styles at different speeds, and it's never going to get where we expect it to be, I guess, as a nation, as long as we keep treating it like that finish line and less like what
Yeah.
you're talking about, like it being a communication tool.
Well,
That's
and
what standards-based
Yeah.
grading is about. Like where you give them a 4, 3, 2, 1 on if they know the standard. Yeah. Sorry, John. Go ahead.
no, I know what you're talking about. Before I left school this afternoon, my last class, um, there were three kids that were sleeping at the end of the class, and they had a thing that they had to do, and I knew it was going to take most of the period. They were sleeping, and what was going through my mind: are they sleeping because they just don't want to do the assignment, or are they sleeping, as you were mentioning, because they know they got to go home and take care of siblings? And could be
Or
either,
work.
or work, yeah. And I know a lot of kids work. That's something that early in my teaching career, not a lot of kids had jobs. You know, their job
Just
was at home to
at
do.
home.
Yeah.
And in fact, I remember one time when in my first couple of years of teaching, that in order to take my jazz band out to a competition, I had to go over to a farm and help with some of my jazz band kids and help haul hay, because that was the only way that this one of our players was going to get to play if all that hay got hauled. So we
Yeah.
Wow.
part of the jazz band over to the farm, and we hauled hay.
And
And
that's because they didn't work outside the home because they had work they did
I
it.
did a lot at home. But
Yeah.
I think now I'm not sure that there's so many kids working because of the pandemic stuff. I think that there's a lot of kids that are not. Um,
And
my experience lately has been I haven't seen that many high school kids working. There must be some somewhere, but
yeah. And instead they make a bigger mess of the house that they stay home in all day, like my children,
could be.
who think they should be paid
they're they're gonna look
in
back
the
on this
house.
episode.
Yeah. You're like, what? So Katie, back when you started teaching, what were the students required to purchase to bring to school?
Oh, what were they? Well, it's a good question. They had to bring pencil, and they had to buy pencils and paper and erasers and um, protractors and compasses, stuff.
Okay.
The school didn't provide all that. Uh, and I honestly couldn't tell you whether either school I sub for now supplies that stuff. I assume the kids supply it, but I don't know that for sure. But yeah, they had to supply all their supplies. And I remember going out even when my sons were growing up. We had it was kind of an affair every fall to go out to the store and buy all this stuff. And uh, my wife likes writing, so that was a chance for her to go out and get a bunch of paper and pencils too. So
Totally. I love school supply shopping. I
yeah,
think the problem nowadays is a lot of the things on the school supply list is for the teachers and for the classroom because there's no funding. Like, so we have to have students like buy their own crayons and scissors and whiteboard markers for the teacher to use on the whiteboard because the teacher doesn't get enough. Like, they're like, here's your 2 whiteboard markers for the year. So I think, and wipies, like to sanitize the room, which now there's plenty of, by the way. They're coming out our butts
Well, that's gotta be
along with
uncomfortable.
sanitizer. There's plenty of that, but I think that's why nowadays you have so many school supplies.
well, I see these days here anyway that the teachers get a stack of supplies at the beginning of the year. They get whiteboard markers markers and erasers and cleaner, staples and for the stapler, and not hairpins. What do I want to? Paper clips, those kinds of things. They get a whole stack of that kind of stuff every year in the fall. But I've also noticed, and this is way different than even just a few years ago before the pandemic, the kids in the two schools that I work with are given a computer.
Yeah.
And that computer in once through school, I think, when they get it as a freshman, it stays with them all through till their senior year. And everything's done on computer. There's very little done on a paper. So if you tell a student to get out a piece of paper, they may not have it. Because I did yesterday and today was done on computer. No, was on a paper that the teacher had me pass out. And so the kids wrote on that. So they had to have a pencil or a pen. But they must buy a lot of pencils because I like these mechanical pencils. They're plastic and I really like them. And I picked them up all over. And I have a whole stack of them here at home that I didn't have to buy. So somebody bought them. I don't know.
And computers are like, that is a huge. I even make my quizzes on the computer, and the computer grades them, which, so yay computers. Our kids every kid has a computer that they take with them. They get a different one each year because they're like, in the summer they do something to them. I don't know what they do to them, but yeah, I think that was a big game changer. I think a lot more schools now too are like a one-to-one school where everybody has a computer.
Yeah, that was on my list of things to ask about how technology, and not even computers, but you must have seen a massive technology shift over the last 40 years, or the six. Man, I can't math. I can't math tonight. Like, what were the other big changes that you saw in technology?
Well, my friend in Texas was communicating with me some interesting stuff for a while, but as I was preparing to meet you tonight, it occurred to me, being a band director, one of the biggest things you do in high school is your marching show. And there's a marching show usually every Friday or every other Friday, and a marching competition and that kind of thing. When I was first teaching, I wrote all my own marching shows. I got out the paper, and one time, somewhere along the line, I found really nice football. I was able to not have to make my own charts that way. I wrote it on the chart paper and then copied it and gave it to the kids. And so that's how we did that. And every week our show changed. So if we had a game this Friday, then the game a week from Friday would have a different show, because I wouldn't use the same show twice in a row. And if we went to a competition, I wrote a different show for the competition. And to do that, there was a set of material that we used. It's kind of hard to explain, but it had little items that we put in and added here and there. And the kids would know, we're going to do this figure, we're going to do this spin, we're going to do this. And we taught them all the little things, and then they showed up in the charts, and they had to do that. And when I got my master's degree that year, that was 1977 when I got my master's. That was the year that we went to what's called corps style marching. And corps style marching pretty much meant that you start in August, or you start in January, and you work all year round and you put the show together, and you buy the show from a company that writes it, and it has all the charts and all the stuff with it, and you give the kids the charts, and so they do the same show all season.
Yeah.
And the first time I did that, I thought that's kind of neat because I don't have to write it. But one time, And I wrote the initial, when I first started getting into that, I wrote the charts. But then later on, I found, well, I can buy these things and I can
Yeah.
have them adapted to the band my size. And that's what most of the bands do now is the core style thing. They march differently than what I was taught, um, and march differently than what I taught to my students for many years. And then they do this show, well, a bunch of times. But also another thing is I've noticed that a lot of the bands, and I think this is all over the country, not here, but the bands aim at a big contest where they can bring home hardware. And a couple of the bands locally go after the national marching competition, which is held in Indianapolis every year. And I don't think that their aim has a lot to do with their fans at their football game. It has more to do with let's win the trophy at the contest.
Yep.
And so they're brilliant. The school I subbed at yesterday, they're brilliant when you see them work. I mean, they have one of the best bands in the country, but they do that same show all year long, and then they go to Indianapolis and show it. When I was teaching, even at the point about buying the shows, I wanted to do a show fans in the stands. I didn't want to go out there and do a show that everybody go away scratching their head, wondering what the world is. And right after I retired, I saw a couple of the band shows, and they were the kind when you walk away, you're scratching your head, going, "What did I just see?" And it's way different. And my friend and I at Texas had been discussing that it's a lot to do with electronics. They use a lot more stuff. And I know you were a percussionist, which I don't know how many percussion people were in the group when you played, but now can be 20 or 30 percussionists playing millions of different instruments. But they also use electronic instruments, electronic pianos, electronic synthesizers, and things like that. And that was, I never used stuff like that when I was teaching. Even up to the end, my last year of teaching was 2002 and 3, and I never used any of that kind of stuff then. I will say I did use it in band on occasion for certain things, but I didn't use it as an all-time, and I never used it at Arching Field.
Yeah, that sounds crazy. Like,
Yeah,
it sounds pretty hard.
It. We never used any electronic stuff.
Well, there wasn't really portable electronic stuff when we were in school. Really? Was there?
There should be.
Really?
Yeah.
I can't remember. But first, let me just say that company that started like selling the marches, genius. So smart.
Well, and the band director me when I retired, he was there for about 5 or 6 years, and then he quit and he went into writing shows for other bands. So he writes them for all of Southern Illinois. He writes shows, and they're good shows. I'll admit that they're really good shows. But
they're just one.
Yeah, it's just one for the.
Yep.
And I think my fans, when I was in my early teaching career, I think that people that we did a different show every week. And that's a major change over the last 40 years from writing a show yourself for doing we did anywhere from 6 to 9 shows a year, because I remember moving to another school after my first teaching job, and we played every single football game, home and away, and I wrote a different show for every one of those games. And then we went to 5 contests a year, and I wrote a different show for those contests, each of the contests.
I did a show too, not just the football game.
They did.
See the show.
And now see the show, but those are mostly parents.
Yeah.
Group, you know, there's not as many followers. I have a lot of people come and tell me that they like the variety of shows. Except
Yeah.
I almost got in trouble one time when the Bud and at the end of the show we played the Budweiser song, and two of my students unfolded a Budweiser banner, and that I was told later that that probably wasn't the appropriate thing to do.
The fact that I did that is so awesome. Like, that is so awesome. I love that. Technology in the classroom, in the regular classroom, and I don't have very far back to go, but even when I first started teaching, it was like projectors. You know, when you had to have the vis-a-vis markers to write on the projector. And now that's not a thing. We don't use projectors. We use smart boards. Click on the board and you can write on the board, or use the whiteboard, or yeah.
So that's what the schools now have. I was early in my teaching career. If I wanted to show the kids an example of a marching show, we had a projector that had one of those round things with
Slides.
movie tape on it.
Oh.
And well, sometimes slides, but I didn't do slides. I did the movie. I would borrow the movie from somewhere or steal it from somewhere, and I would show the kids the movie. This is how this idea is done. And that was, again, I had a group of things that we did and put together for each show. Now, some people will say, well, that's pretty easy because all you did was teach your kids a dozen or so little moves, and then you could put them together in various ways. That's kind of true.
Yeah.
That's what we did. But a real projector to show the video. There was no VCR or CD or DVD or any of that.
That's funny.
And also something else that is way, way different from when I started teaching to now. And a couple of my former students have mentioned and said I should mention this, is that when I first started teaching, if kids, they had to ask if they could use the phone in the office. And it took me a couple of years, my first job, before the school got my phone in my office in the band room. And then I had to, I couldn't just let anybody go use it. No, they had to have a good reason to use it. And now when you're sitting in class, like today, I was watching kids and they were supposed to be working on this Canvas program, watching a movie and answering questions. And they had their computers up, but they also had their phone in their hand, dingling and around. And the phones drive me crazy in school, but
So yeah, they drive me crazy too. And my phone in my classroom rings all day long. All day long, the office calling me or another teacher calling. I'm like, it is so annoying.
They don't know you're teaching? Like, isn't that
Right? They call for kids. Is so-and-so in your room? No, he's not in my room. He's next door now. Like, how do you not know this? Like, I don't know if it's just my class or everybody in the school. And yes, Stephen, overhead projector is what it's called. Yes.
is
And
that the one that hangs from the ceiling?
no, the one that
with the clear presentation paper,
yeah.
the negative
Yeah.
the negative projector, I guess, if you wanted to call it something sort of.
I have no idea.
One of my schools that I work with has these these computer projectors that hang from the ceiling, but every classroom has a different kind.
Yeah.
Oh.
And I go in, they say, show something on there. And I go, the remote is different in each class, the projector's different, and I don't know how to do it, so I have to go ask somebody to come out of their classroom to show me how to do it, because they're all different. And
Yeah.
I said to a couple of people, wouldn't it be better if you got all the same kind? And the high school where I used to taught, where I taught when I was teaching, they have all the same kind of projectors, so it's a lot easier to follow. But the other school, which generally they have a wide variety of projectors.
That's annoying. Drive me crazy. Katie asks a good question, or
No,
do you
go
want
ahead.
me
Go ahead.
to go? Yeah, that's a good question to sum things up. How do you think kids have changed or do changed through the years?
I think that kids have changed and have not changed. Um, I have people told me that when I started getting older that kids wouldn't relate to me anymore because I was an old person. And when I was getting older, when I was teaching and realized I was getting older when I was in my 50s, um, the kid, it depends on you as a person. And I think that the kids are still just as good as they ever were as far as anything. And I think they're still just as talented, have just as much ability. It's just that they are encouraged in a way not to use all that ability. I I really believe in the students. I have a total belief in the students where I work, even though I'm a sub. I'm not an official teacher, but even though the superintendent asked me the other when I asked her about my subbing, she says, "Do you get a paycheck from this district?" And I said, "Yes." She says, "Then you're a teacher in the district."
Yes.
But yeah, I do believe that the kids changed that much. Um, they have things that have made them seem changed, but
Agreed. Yes, I agree with that so much. Um,
Ooh, ooh.
Stephen asks, what's your favorite grade to sub for and why? Or subject? Your favorite grade or
oh,
subject?
interesting question. Both schools. Well, one we have something here in Illinois called split districts, where the high school is one school district and the elementary area and junior high is a separate district altogether within the same town. And one of the schools I teach for is a district, and so I only go to the high school. I never even applied at the elementary. They have different numbers, district, they're different numbers. The district where I taught is all one unit district. It's all the same thing. But my, I think my favorite grade, anything in high school, I don't really get off on teaching anything in elementary anymore. I will work if he asks me. But I don't like going to the other grade levels very much. And yeah, asked me at one point to teach elementary classroom, first grade, I think it's what it was. And they were doing multiplication tables, and not tables. They were doing multiplication. And I was supposed to show these kids how to multiply like 5 times 5. And so I showed them how to do it. No, that's not right. That doesn't work. And I said, maybe it's not right. That's the right answer. And here's how I got it. No, you have to use 41 steps to get to 5 times 5. Uh, I hated that. And so I said, I'll never go sub in an elementary again, ever. High school kids, and my favorite class, of course, band is my favorite class, but I don't sub in band very often because the band director is never on,
Yeah.
like I wasn't. Um, but I love to sub for history and Spanish and primarily history and English. Those are my two favorite subjects.
That sounds fun.
I wanted to get in one question real quick. And it
Yes.
may be a little bit of a long one, but I think it may be important. Either that or it's going to be super anticlimactic. So we just got through a couple of years of shenanigans where kids are working from home and stuff because of the COVIDs. You were teaching during the like early 1980s, late 1980s, second like measles outbreak. Another super contagious thing. Did you see any differences in like how that was handled? It was obviously less dangerous ultimately, and mostly had to do with like the lack of vaccinations. But was there any lines drawn, any parallels between then and now?
Well, the work was just sent home to the kids then. And in the pandemic, it was all this over the computer. And a lot of the students that I've talked to, um, and I wait till they bring it up, but they didn't like this e-learning, I guess is what they call. They didn't like it at all. Most of them, and a lot of them felt like if you turn on the computer and you're supposed to follow this lesson or something, that you don't have the access to the teacher as much, and therefore you're not going to learn it as well. And that's how I see that. And during the 80s, what you're talking about, the thing was sent home with detailed instructions on what to do. And if the kids were well enough to work on it, they could. And then if they came back, then the teacher would work with them when they got back and make sure they understood what they had been doing.
So only the sick kids in that instance were sent home, not all the kids working from home.
Right.
Okay.
Right. No, only the sick kids were sent home. And if they had the measles, if there were 3 or 4 kids in a class with the measles, they went home and they stayed at home. And the stuff was sent home to them through some system. And
that makes sense. I know the virtual learning that just happened is teachers aren't trained in virtual teaching. Like, so they weren't able to be as good of a teacher as they could be because they were thrown into it too. And it's so easy to give up when it's virtual. Students and teachers.
Yeah.
So easy to be like, well, let's just do this. I'm tired. Okay, move on.
And I heard that from a lot of students too. I think sometimes students will tell me things because I am a sub, because I'm not their regular teacher, and they don't think the regular teacher is going to go back and tell the principal or whatever. And that was the one thing, I think I kind of alluded to this, but one of the biggies over the years was being able to be close to a student without somebody assuming you were going to be a naughty person. You know, that part of my career, I'm glad that I retired when I did, because I was able to be close to my students and I was able to help them with a lot of things. We talked, they wanted advice about this and that, and that doesn't happen as much anymore.
Yeah, you have to be careful, and like you said, accusations. It is sad. Do you want to
Oh
read
yeah.
what Steven
It
wrote?
sounds like and Steven's all compliments today. He said you sound like an awesome educator. Your story about hauling hay so your students could go to jazz competitions gave him warm fuzzies. He guarantees the students you sub for now appreciate you more than you know.
And let me just tell you, Steven is usually like a troll, and he's like coming out with the compliments. So this hay.
Well, hauling the hay was more like a warm, scratchy.
John is so clever too. So clever. Is there any last things that you wanted to make sure to get across, John, before we end today?
Just that I think it's important personally for teachers to care about their students. I know that's an easy word to say, but I think caring about your students is really, really important. And even as a sub, I've had students come up and want to share things with me, and I'm hesitant because of the obvious problems these days. But yes, I think caring about students is really important. And I do know teachers who do that. I know several that do that. One friend of mine is a drama teacher, and I gave her daughter clarinet lessons. And she would sometimes send me to her house to give the lesson to her daughter. And she wouldn't be home from school yet. And I never even thought about it during the time. After the fact, after we couldn't give lessons because of the pandemic, but she trusted me. And I think that's what an educator is about: trust and believe. Believe in the students, and they'll trust in you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, John, for joining us today. It was enlightening.
Quite.
And I learned a lot. Yeah. It went by so
did.
fast. Like, this is one of the fastest ones we've had. Like, zoom.
Well, I don't know. So we don't know 100% what's going on next week. We're hoping for a gun rights advocate of some variety. If not, we may go to the new idea that we're messing with, the wheel.
Wheel up.
I'm glad she did that
Randomness.
because yeah.
You have to say it like that. You can't just say wheel of randomness.
I didn't even remember what it was called, so I'm glad. I'm just overall glad you took over. But please like, share, subscribe down below, share with your friends, so everybody can get all of the value from this, all of the information that John had to share. It was a great episode. So do that, and we'll see you next week. And in the meantime, have meaningful conversations.